and the challenges that we face in this turbulent time in global history. And yet, I see sunlight filtering through these dark clouds. We have assembled the best Filipino minds to help navigate us to this global crisis that we are now facing. We will endure. Let our Filipino spirit ever remain undimmed. I know this in my mind. I know it in my heart. I know it in my very soul. The state of the nation is sound.
Thank you to all who prepared that next day edit audiovisual presentation on the administration's socio-economic agenda. If you hear snoring coming from anywhere in reception hall, that would be them. Anyway, now we move on to our first panel session. For this session, we will hear from the economic managers on their plans on recovery and transformation. Our moderator for the first panel is none other than DBM Undersecretary Margo Salcedo. USEC Margo, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tony. I call him Dr. Tony because he's actually Managing Director of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So he's MD. So to me, he's Dr. Tony. So good morning again, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you today. And I am very, very excited to kick off the first panel discussion on economic development. Following the President's SONA yesterday and Secretary Jokno's keynote address, I'm sure you now already have a clear picture of the administration's economic priorities and plans. So to give us more details on this, let me now call on our key economic officials to please join me on stage, starting with, of course, the chairman of the Economic Development Cluster, Department of Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno. Secretary Jokno will be joined by Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Governor Felipe Medalla. We also have with us National Economic and Development Authority Secretary Arsenio Balisacan. And we also have with us Department of Trade and Industry Secretary Alfredo Pascual. And last but not the least, and to me the most important because she's my boss, Department of Budget and Management Secretary Amina Pangandaman. And so now I will be joining our distinguished panel. Before anything else, could we please check our mics if our microphones work? We would not want to miss a word that any of you would say. Hello. Good morning, good morning. Can everyone say good morning?
Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. So before
Good morning,
any...
good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wasn't that an amazing, electrifying, empowering State of the Nation address yesterday? Maybe just for a backgrounder for our audience today, in case you missed the hour and a half very empowering speech of President Ferdinand Marcos, one of the highlights, shall we begin with this? One of the highlights that he began with was the medium-term fiscal framework. And he said that we will be having a medium-term fiscal strategy that has an 8-point socio-economic agenda. So we have with us our NEDA Secretary. Could you kindly, sir, enlighten us on this medium-term fiscal strategy that our president is very proud of?
Thank you. Actually, the 8-point agenda was ably enumerated already earlier in the presentation of
Yes.
Sec Joc. No, but let me emphasize that the 8 points agenda has the two components. One is the near term, the other one is the medium term. For the near term, the issues are, and that we aim to address, are to accelerate the high prices or the inflation, the vulnerability of our population to shocks, and the scars, addressing the scars that the pandemic has have caused. No? And in the medium term, it's all about job creation and sustaining growth of 6.5 to 8% during the period. And for that to happen, we need to address the constraints to growth, constraint to employment, quality employment creation that have been well identified in various fora, even by our own development partners. And these include issues affecting infrastructure, and as you have seen, infrastructure is going to be a major focus here of this administration. The issues on energy, it's also a major concern that we are going to address, and the logistics issues. And insofar as job creation is concerned, of course, we have to address the two sides of the market. On the supply side, we will need to look at the employability of our workers and their education, health, and that's why opening up the school system to full face-to-face is a high priority. Opening up the economy to fully was emphasized by the president. That's a means to reduce and to address the scars quickly, and finally, with respect to the creation of jobs, on the demand side, we look at again these constraints to job creation, and I would like to emphasize here that developing our high quality jobs, creating sectors, particularly manufacturing, will be highlighted, and that as part of this is to also get the private sector interested. And here, as you have heard in the president's speech, there is going to be a strengthening of the public-private partnership, and that will allow us to get the economy going even as we are constrained by the debt. But the whole objective is to outgrow the debt, as Sec Ben has been emphasizing, by getting the economy growing at 6.5 to 8%. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's very optimistic, but you did mention economic constraints, and so may we ask our Bangko Sentral governor, considering that the president himself acknowledged that we need economic recovery, and he also mentioned inflation rates. How will the current inflation and policy rate affect the outlook on monetary and financial stability vis-a-vis economic growth?
Okay, so to begin with, as stated by the President and by Secretary Jokno, much of our inflation is what's called supply side, and a big part of it is imported. But we had to act because what we're afraid of is this imported inflation will have a life of its own and start self-fulfilling prophecy of prices are rising because prices are rising. So we increased the policy rate by, well, we did it 3 times, 25 basis points, 25 basis points, and then a surprise 75. It's a surprise because it was not in the calendar to meet on interest, and of course 75 was considered large. However, when you look at it, there's still, our monetary policy is still very supportive of economic growth. Indeed, the policy rate, which used to be a record low 2%, is now just around 3.25%. So, by and large, our estimate is the economy can absorb the increase in the policy rate. Of course, our own models in the BSP says that in spite of all these increases in the policy rate, the government's forecast of 6.5 to 7.5 this year is well within reach. And 6.5 to 8.5 going forward, 2023 and onwards, are still all quite attainable. The other point is that we also looked at the banks. Of course, the banks hold the government securities. The price of the securities will fall as interest rates rise. But again, we look at the capitalization of the banks. The banks are very adequately capitalized, so they can absorb the rate hikes. So we're very optimistic that the monetary policy and credit supply will remain supportive of growth and financial stability. So going forward, of course, there is so much uncertainty, but we stand ready to make the necessary adjustments so that balancing between maintaining and sustaining growth and ensuring financial stability on the one hand and price stability on the other will all be achieved. Of course, this year we will not meet our 2 to 4% target. Inflationary forces outside the Philippines are just too high. Indeed, even countries with very low inflation in the past, like Singapore, of course, the United States and the EU, are actually experiencing even higher inflation than we are. And as stated, the government is also undertaking measures that will protect the vulnerable. And in addition, the supply side measures. Like the government is relaxing import restrictions so that imported supply can augment domestic supply.
Thank you so much, sir. And so now we live in uncertain times globally, but thankfully we have economic geniuses in our midst, including the former central bank governor, now finance secretary Ben Jokno, who helped us not only survive but thrive throughout the pandemic. So, sir, President Marcos in his State of the Nation address yesterday said that we have and we will find solutions. And one of the solutions that he mentioned was making the Philippines an investment destination. So with that, he said that he will continue the Build, Build, Build program that was started during the Duterte administration. And in fact, now it will become Build Better More. I had to think about that for a while because it's actually BBM. It's so clever. Build Better More. So as we continue to do infrastructure development spending at 5 to 6% of GDP for the next 6 years. Does the government have the fiscal space for its infrastructure development program? And how does the government plan to fund such a massive infrastructure program?
The short answer to that question is yes. We have the fiscal space, and I have several reasons for the optimism. Number one, the Duterte administration left this government a sound tax system. It's a much better tax system than he inherited from the previous administration. And we will enhance the improved tax system. So that will give us more revenues. Number two, as mentioned by the President, we will right-size the government so that the government will be in a much better shape, and we can do much more with less. So we'll have some efficiency gain as a result of that. Number three, when the Duterte administration came in, we don't have a list of ready-to-implement projects. Now the Duterte administration is leaving us some easily 200 ready-to-implement projects. Okay, so with the game-changing reforms such as the Public Service Act, we can actually use the public-private partnership to enhance implement some of those projects. So we will maximize our gain from the new legislation. And number four is that because we feel that this is our moment, the Philippine economy can move much faster this time compared to other stages in our economy. And so a stronger economy means more revenues down the road. Thank you.
Muntik na ako kumanta, sir. This is our moment. Okay, I'm just trying to wake everybody up. Okay, speaking of the solutions that President Marcos mentioned in his State of the Nation address yesterday, aside from making the Philippines an investment destination, another solution that he mentioned was what Secretary Jokno mentioned, which is having efficiency gains. And then he went on to talk about his legislative priorities, and those went straight to the priorities as well of our Budget Secretary, Amina Pangandaman. So ma'am, what are the priority budget reforms of the Marcos administration, and how will the administration ensure inclusivity in the national budget preparation? So maybe we'll go po to the legislative priorities of President Marcos and how these align with yours.
Thank you, Yusek Margo. You know, we are very lucky to have a president who is attuned and at the same time committed to advocate real reforms, both economic and structural. So two of the major legislative reforms, part of the top 19, is the right-sizing bill and the cash-based management. It's the Budget Modernization Act. As previously mentioned, the right-sizing bill will help our bureaucracy have an agile, efficient, responsive, and technology-driven workforce. So it is not actually a mass layoff of government workers. It is actually giving it more efficient to be able to service the people. And then second, it's the cash-based budgeting or the budget monetization system. This will instill or strengthen fiscal discipline among our government employees. We will use and allocate our scarce resources to be able to finance our priority programs and projects. We will ensure that every peso in our GAA will be spent and implemented timely. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And then another solution that President Marcos mentioned was developing a Philippine brand Philippine brand that we can be proud of. Although he actually mentioned it to segue to the Department of Tourism, I think this is also very relevant, sir, for the Department of Trade and Industry, especially as we have many MSMEs who are creating their own Philippine brands that we are all very, very proud of. So maybe for Secretary Pascual, we could ask, MSMEs represent a major growth area in the Philippine economy. How can DTI build their business amidst the digital revolution, and how can SMEs be encouraged to think global?
Well, we've heard our colleagues talk about the macro economy. Let me just try to address some of the meso and micro challenges that we're facing and the programs that we have lined up to address these challenges. The matter of the Philippine brand is very important if we are promoting Philippine exports. And of course, you mentioned already attracting visitors for tourism. We will work on that. We have the creative industry law that's coming up, and that could help us develop the Philippine brand. Now, I would like to also talk about the need for the country to industrialize already, to give that focus on industrialization. Before I go to MSMEs, I'd like to talk about the work we intend to do to develop industries so that we can create higher quality and higher paying jobs for Filipinos. And the video already focused on the 3 clusters of industries that we are going to look at. We need to address, of course, the constraints. There are structural and systemic constraints. Energy cost is one, and that, based on the speech of the President, will be addressed by going renewable and consider the adoption of nuclear energy in the Philippines. Now, the other challenge, of course, is the cost of logistics, and that will be addressed by the PPP and other infrastructure projects that the government will implement, as well as organizing our logistics sector, which are so fragmented at the moment. I met with them last week, and we have agreed, to coordinate more so we can avoid the so many transfers of goods that make logistic costs go up. The other area of industrialization is in the emerging field, and we're lucky to be a source of green metals like nickel, cobalt, and copper. Unfortunately, we have been selling these metals as ores. We are exporting these metals as ores, and we are not able to maximize the value addition. We need to move towards further processing of these ores so we are able to generate more value addition locally before we export the metals. These metals are critical in the new industries, particularly in the manufacture of batteries that go into electric vehicles, into hyperscalers devices. So it's going to be it is going to go into higher demand products that will be needed for these emerging industries. In the health sciences, I think the President mentioned about generic medicine. That's something that we're going to encourage, either to be provided to us by multinationals, but formulated and manufactured in the Philippines through tolling arrangements with the local companies. But we are also encouraging our local pharmaceutical industry to go into more production of generics. Now, on MSMEs, the 3 things we're making sure that they will have are market access, technology, and finance. And through digitalization, we hope to be able to provide these three things. We are developing e-commerce platforms in addition to the very popular e-commerce platforms that we know about. This will be dedicated to MSMEs, and this will surely provide them access to a wider market locally and hopefully in the global arena as well. On technology, we are very keen on helping our MSMEs to be driven by science and technology, and through that be able to introduce innovation together with digitalization, that these two will be the formula for their success. And hopefully we will be seeing our MSMEs graduating from micro to small, from small to medium, and medium to large. But they have to be competitive both locally and globally. In fact, they're being globally competitive is also important locally, because our borders are open. We're importing a lot of goods against which local production has to compete. So our MSME should be globally competitive in the local market as well as in the global market.
Thank you so much.
By the way, the financing, with digitalization, financing will be almost automatic, because with digitalization, the accumulation of transaction data will be available and can be the basis for credit scoring, and with the credit score, financing can be handled by financial institutions. Thank you.
More efficiency gains. So thank you so much, sir. So inspired. I'm starting a business today. Okay, so now you mentioned President Marcos's statement yesterday about how he will be tapping multinationals for pharmaceuticals. And in that respect, we recognize that the importance of the private sector. And so if we may ask the Finance Secretary once again, what areas of partnership or collaboration can the private sector endeavor to support the plans and programs of the Marcos administration?
So we have a recently approved law, for example, the Public Service Act, that will open up private sector participation, international investment in telecommunication, toll roads, shipping, etc. But with respect to private sector, as you know, the contribution of government to the economy is only 20%. 80% is private sector. Telco is private sector in the Philippines, water is private sector, etc. So we will just provide the environment for the private sector to thrive. And of course, they are welcome to invest in a country whose growth potential is one of the highest in the region. So you're welcome. It's fairly open. Whatever comes to your imagination, you can come in. And in fact, the other thing is because there are no more resources given to the local governments, you can even invest in local activities. And by the way, as the President emphasized, he will focus, is on the rail system, right? Mass transit system. And as you open up more communities, like for example, if you construct that railway from Calamba to Matnog and to Sorsogon, that will open up a lot of areas. The railway system that we are currently doing from Manila to Malolos to Clark, that will also open up a lot of areas. And then of course, the first ever subway system that we are constructing is a 20-kilometer subway system. So there's a lot of possibilities, and the private sector is welcome to participate in this economic boom for the Philippines.
Low bat. Thankfully, it's not my brain and just my mic. Okay, so so thank you, and we hope that with all of these policies, the private sector will be encouraged to truly make the Philippines an investment destination. And given that, as Secretary Jokno mentioned, that we would like to create an environment conducive for the private sector to come in, may we ask our Bangko Sentral governor, are there any additional rate hikes in the horizon? What developments and factors will the BSP consider with respect to its policy decision?
One thing I can say is you can surprise people only once. So there will be no more off cycle. As to how many more rate hikes before the end of the year, that will be very data dependent. On the one hand, here I come, you need an economist with two hands. On the one hand, the current drop in the price of oil, it's now below 100, signals that there's less a need for rate hikes. On the other hand, the U.S. is surely going to raise its policy rate by 75 basis points, where you are in a situation where the U.S. policy rate and the Philippine policy rate are now almost, very little difference between the two. And like it or not, the U.S. dollar is the safe haven currency. So, and too much depreciation of the peso, what we economists call overshooting, could actually add to an inflation that's already high. So these are the things we are balancing. So there are forces, changes that say that, well, there will be more rate hikes, but not too much. But there are forces too that say, well, as long as the U.S. keeps jacking up rates, very hard for a small open economy not to respond at least partially. So my own guess is, well, our next meeting is August. If you were to bet on three numbers, 0, 25, four numbers, 0, 25, 50, 75, you can rule out just like in diving, you can rule out the lowest and the highest. Right? In diving, then you give the score. So I guess that's all I can say so far. Because to begin with, Secretary Jokno and I are just two votes in the Monetary Board. So I cannot say at this point how each one will be voting. But my guess, as I said, is maybe we can rule, come this August meeting, we can rule out 0 and we can rule out 75. Now, for the rest of the year, it all depends what happens outside the Philippines. A lot of the forces that drive inflation now are external, but what we don't want is the high inflation creates a momentum that people, you'll have wage adjustment, fare adjustment, so inflation begetting more inflation. What we call, terrible term, second order effects. And that's what monetary policy is looking at. Of course, you have to balance, because if we raise too much, the economy weakens to the point that it's actually bad for banks. Of course, it's also bad for people. On the other hand, high inflation, everybody hates high inflation. So that is the balancing act.
Okay, so speaking of that balancing act, sige na nga sir, gobyerno na lang mag-a-adjust. As President Marcos said yesterday, what he will do is there will be a realignment of our expenditure priorities. So maybe Secretary Pangandaman can enlighten us on this realignment of our expenditure priorities. What are your budget priorities, ma'am, now, and how do these align with the President's?
Of course, our budget will support our medium-term fiscal framework and the 8-point agenda presented a while ago. So maybe I can just share the top 5. While we are still working on the budget now, and we plan to submit this in Congress by August 22 and pass before the Christmas break. So maybe the top 5 will be, first, of course, we will put funding, allocate funding for education. It is a top priority as mandated by the Constitution. Second, we will also pour funding in the health sector. It is important to have a healthy and increase productivity of our members in the society. Next is, of course, our infrastructure sector. We will still continue with the build of the previous administration and expand the same up to 2 trillion maybe by 2028 of funding for our infrastructure sector. And of course, maybe in our top 5 for our budget next year will be funding for our agriculture. We will make our farmers and fisher folks more productive. We will support in terms of their services and mechanize, use technology in their processes. So we'll have self-sufficiency and self-security and lower the food prices in the country. Thank you.
Exciting times. Imagine top 5, not just education, but now also health and agriculture. Yesterday, at the State of the Nation address, President Marcos also mentioned a Philippine development plan. And he even said that NEDA has a deadline. Submit by the end of the year. So, sir, could you enlighten us on that Philippine development plan?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Marco. The NEDA, as many of you know, prepares in coordination with other agencies, the blueprint for socioeconomic development plan for the country. The elements of that plan for the current administration have been laid out. All we need to do now are put this together in a coherent framework so that we can have the basis for proper monitoring and reporting to the President, to Congress, stakeholders on the progress you are making in the implementation. It's going to be challenging, and this is the first time actually that we will produce a Philippine development plan before the start of the year of the implementation of that plan. We haven't been successful in producing a development plan before the start of the implementation. But this is great. It provides us an opportunity to ensure that it's a government as one, that all the agencies, all the concerned stakeholders are moving in one direction and not scattered around, and to ensure that the goals that we have aimed for ourselves will be achieved. And mind you, our intention here and our aspirations here is not to just achieve high growth, sustained growth of 6.5% to 8%, but even more importantly, to ensure that that growth is more inclusive this time than in the previous years, so that our Filipino people, the majority of poor people, will also rise with the tide. That's the intention, and critical to that is our success in generating high quality jobs and raising productivity. Productivity should be the single, or not to say it's single, but a key measure of success, that we're able to get more with less with our resources. And that's our job, to coordinate that process of going there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And I guess related to that, one of the things that was also mentioned by President Marcos yesterday and also in the keynote address today was our goal of having single-digit poverty and upper middle income status. One of the questions that we received from registration was, when will the Philippines attain upper middle income status? When? Deadline na naman, sir. When? And what does this mean to the majority of Filipino families, and what will drive the attainment of this goal? This is also for Secretary Balisacan.
At the rate we are growing, and assuming that we will achieve the 6.5 to 7.5 growth this year, and the 6.5 to 8% next year, we should be reaching that minimum of 4,250 US dollars, no? In 2024. And by the time then we will become a member of the so-called upper middle income class. Now, that will mean that the size of the economic pie will be bigger, and that will mean that even without Secretary Jokno raising, the rates of taxes, the size of the government revenues will be much bigger, and so we have more resources for meeting public services, providing public services, and social protection, among other needs. So it's so crucial that we are able to grow quickly and sustain that growth, because that is the more sustainable way of reducing poverty and achieving greater distribution of opportunities.
That is so encouraging, sir. 2024 is just around the corner, so we're very excited for achieving that dream. Manufacturing, for Secretary Pascual, manufacturing is a big driver for economic growth. So may we ask, how can we transform manufacturing into a globally competitive industry?
We are for manufacturing, we are focusing on areas where we have strategic advantage. Like, for example, many of our people are already in digital type jobs. So we'll move into manufacturing that will make full use of such skills. But quite apart from specific industries, I'd like to be able to encourage manufacturing by further empowering our private sector. It's very important, that we encourage the private sector to invest, both local investors and international investors. And we have to make it easy for them. If there are incentives given in a particular law, I would like us to be very careful in crafting the implementing rules and regulations so that no restrictions, additional restrictions, are added outside the law. I've seen this in the Renewable Energy Act, where foreign ownership restrictions have been introduced, although there is no provision for that in the law. And in the implementation of the CREATE Act, I hope that whatever is provided as tax incentives will be implemented as provided for in the law. And then there is the issue also of bigness. There's a tendency to constrain the growing of companies. I think we need to encourage and support the growth of Philippine companies, particularly those who are going to compete in the international market, because in the globalized and highly contestable market, the players are all big companies, and we need big companies, to compete with their counterparts from foreign countries. Those are a few things, few thoughts that come to mind, when you ask about how we encourage and how we support manufacturing.
Thank you, sir. Another item that President Marcos mentioned yesterday in his State of the Nation address, I guess leading to empowerment, is empowerment of local government units. And he mentioned the Mandanas ruling. Could we ask our Finance Secretary if he could enlighten us on this and how this will affect or how this will empower our local governments?
Okay, for the information of the audience, the Mandanas ruling, in effect, increased the amount of resources that are given to LGUs, local government units. Okay, so they had more money now than before as a result of that. And in an executive order issued by President Duterte before he left office, he specified some of the items that are now going to be assigned to LGUs. These are not really new items because this is already mentioned in the Regional Local Government Code of 1991, except that there are some items that are probably not, there should be, this item should not be there in the first place. So right now we are reviewing what spending items should be assigned to LGUs, and we are in close coordination with, of course, the leagues of cities, provinces, etc., and of course the Secretary of Local Government. Maybe this question can be asked to Secretary Ben Har later in the. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, there is a phone-in question. Phone-in. There is a question that was requested to be asked to Secretary RC. What is the strategy to reach the 50 million PhilSys IDs target by the end of 2022? How will this target be achieved given the current pace of card printing and delivery?
Thank you. Just for context, as of July 8 this year, the total ID that has been printed is about 14 million, and so the 50 million targeted for this year is a combination of physical ID and digital ID. 30 million of those would be in the physical ID. No? Where we are lagging behind is in the production of the physical ID. We have already identified the problems, and our Philippine Statistics Authority and our BSP have been discussing how the way moving forward. No? So we think that is doable. For the also announced yesterday by the President, by the mid next year, the 92 million IDs, which would cover the 5 years old and above, no? Would be completed by mid next year. No? And also for the rest of the year, those before below 5 no? Would also be produced. And also, just to put again also context here, no, that the printing is going to be an annual activity because there are roughly 1.5 million people added every year, no, so it's not going to end, but it will be a continuing exercise. Thank you.
And so I guess another aspect of that success is the effort for digitalization. So maybe we could ask our Budget Secretary, what are the efforts for digitalization? Maybe we can begin with your department, and if you have other goals for digitalization.
I think Sec Ivan will discuss later the overall strategy on digitalization and the use of technology. But at least on the part of DBM, we want to roll out the Budget Treasury Management System. It is actually an online ledger of all transactions of the government, from planning up to the release of the budget. So you will see the levels of the budget at a given time. You will see the releases, you will see the balances of our budget. So it will ensure transparency in government transactions. And in line with the national ID, I think will be a good support in providing social safety nets and support to our disadvantaged communities, like the giving out of 4Ps, the giving out of resources to our fisher folks and even to our senior citizens.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. And then, aside from digitalization, another key word that was highlighted was inclusivity. Could the chairman of the Economic Development Cluster tell us what are the policies, programs that the administration would have towards this goal?
Well, inclusivity means that no one should be left behind, right? So our resources will be, as mentioned, will be focused on education, health, and of course, social protection. We want to make sure that the Filipino child will be given the appropriate education and health care so that he will have a fighting chance to move in the economic ladder. And so we will, I think, as we invest in physical infrastructure, we will continue to invest in human resources. Human resources is, I would consider it as one of our most important asset, because in an aging world, a young population that we have could be an asset because they could be developed as a competent and workforce that could provide us more income down the road.
Thank you, sir. And we actually were able to receive your questions upon registering. So a lot of them were already incorporated in the questions that were asked earlier, but we have a bit of extra time. So I'm going to ask some from specific members. This one is from Ruben Zamora of Metrobank. He asked, which sectors does the new government see as having the highest growth potential that can reap benefits in the short and medium term? Maybe Secretary Pascual? Which sectors does the new government see, the Marcos administration see, as having the highest growth potential that can reap benefits in the short and medium term? Maybe Secretary Pascual and then Secretary Jokno.
The sector that is growing very fast, is that the question?
Highest growth potential.
Highest growth potential and actually growing very fast is the IT IBPM sector. It's growing at the rate of 10 to 15% per annum, and the potential is even greater now with the heightened use of digitalization and online services as a result of the pandemic. So that's the sector we're focusing, one of the sectors we're focusing on in DTI, so that we can encourage more locators here to set up their IT BPM backroom operation.
Thank you, sir. And you had earlier,
May I
sorry,
answer?
Secretary Jokno. Yes,
my
sir.
guess is, given the base effect, I think I will bet mining sector will be the fastest growing. From almost near zero, I think it can grow very fast. Okay? Mining.
Mining. Iba po yung mining sa live selling, ha? For those of you who watched that. Different yon. Okay, so for earlier, Secretary Pascual talked about MSMEs. There was actually a question from Alan Roy of TR Bank. He asked, this is for Bangko Sentral po, but supporting MSMEs. How will BSP support banks whose primary focus is lending to MSMEs who were the hardest hit during the pandemic?
Okay, we had temporary relief, which was lending to MSMEs qualify as reserves. But that's not exactly a good long-term solution because it makes the banks don't get fair. Some banks that are so specialized and somewhere else may not actually get a reduction in reserve requirements. So in the long run, our view is lower reserve requirements for everybody. Of course, to the extent that when Sec Ben was governor, he was promising single digit before the end of his term, which I suppose is before the end of my term, right? Now, when you look at MSMEs, we central bankers call this a fiscal problem because the solution is a guarantee fund where the banks, when they lose money lending to SMEs, do not absorb 100% of the loss. So the question is, okay, how much is the fund? How much is the sharing of losses? By the way, the reason that is that it's the banks that will still make the credit decision. So allocating money for a guarantee fund is the first one. The second one is deciding how much of the loss will be absorbed by the lending bank and how much will be absorbed by the fund. And the third one is how much is the guarantee fee. And that's where the subsidy comes. The guarantee fee will be lower than the actuarial requirements for the fund to break even. And the reason that can happen, of course, is government subsidy. Now, what we don't want is laws saying banks must lend X to sector X. Okay, our experience is that's very hard because, for instance, a bank that is just a foreign bank with very few employees doing wholesale, tell them to lend to SMEs. Just actually telling them not to be in the Philippines. Okay, so my point is the best solution is fiscal. The government putting its money where its mouth is, deciding how much funds to allocate to the guarantee fund, and putting in all the safeguards so that we don't insure the dead. You know? Okay, so this is the problem sometimes with guarantee funds. Some loan has already soured, and somehow it's resuscitated and brought to the fund. But there will be experience there, I think, when then Undersecretary of Agriculture Berna Romulo, who eventually became Secretary of Tourism and is now Deputy Governor of Central Bank, the experience is quite good, actually. The guarantee fund that was called another ugly name, Agricultural Guarantee Pool Fund, actually encouraged quite a bit of lending. So with good governance and funding, we can encourage lending to sectors that would otherwise have no access to credit. So it's not just the Philippines. If these funds can be set up and be covered by good governance, we can expand lending to MSMEs.
Thank you, sir. And hello to Deputy Governor Berna Romulo. Okay, so that wraps up our panel. Before we close, however, could we just ask for final words from our distinguished panel? Of course, ladies first. We will start with Budget Secretary Pangandaman.
Thank you. The Department of Budget and Management will endeavor to craft a budget towards the 8th economic agenda and economic transformation, towards a sustainable, inclusive, and a budget for prosperity. again, given that, we will also endeavor to pass the budget on time with the help of our friends from Congress. Thank you.
And let's do it this way, from the other end, Secretary Balisacan.
Okay, the 8-point agenda, doable. So, as often asked question, right? Of course it is, and with all your participation, support of stakeholders, government, we will deliver the Philippine Development Plan as instructed by the President before the end of the year, and will ensure that the President will receive periodic reports on the implementation of this development plan.
And Secretary Pascual.
Well, the private sector is the engine of economic growth. Government is there to provide an enabling environment, and we in the government should help facilitate investments from the private sector.
Thank you. And BSP Governor Felipe Medalla.
Well, the three pillars of central banking are price stability, financial stability, and a secure, efficient payment system. We will guarantee that, do our best to make sure that all those three pillars are strong. But the reason we have those three pillars is to serve the people. So we'll work very hard to expand financial inclusion.
Thank you, sir. And last but not the least, the chairman of the Economic Development Cluster, Secretary Benjamin Diokno.
As the President said yesterday, the state of the economy is sound. So my advice to the private sector is trust your government. We're behind you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are looking forward to the agenda for prosperity of the Marcos administration. Thank you very much, sirs and ma'am.